In this video, I'm going to explain to you why transcription in the finance industry is a lot more challenging than what first meets the eye, and why the evolution of AI transcription, there is still a number of different facets of finance transcription specifically that is yet to be solved with AI, and why there's still a reason for human-in-the-loop editing in 2025. For those of you who don't know me, I'm James Nguyen. I'm the CEO and founder of Inflection Transcribe. We've been in the industry since 2019, specializing in finance transcription. We've worked with some of the biggest expert networks in the world, multi-billion-dollar organizations in the finance space, as well as major data providers and platforms in the industry as well. Let's get into it. So the first question we got asked was, what are the biggest challenges in accurately transcribing financial terminology that most people outside of the industry don't understand? Okay, so let's take a couple of steps back. So these AI transcription models that you see coming out now, there's a lot of different providers. You have Assembly AI, you have DeepGram, you have Whisper from OpenAI, you have Amazon, you have Google, you have so many different providers. Now, if you think about what is the data sets that have trained the accuracy of these models, that will inform what specific terminology or what specific speaking patterns or language that they're going to be most familiar with, i.e. what is the highest accuracy for them. So there's a couple of different variables. Number one, what are the topics that they're trained on? You think about all the podcasts, all the YouTube videos, all the potential audio data sets that it could have been trained on, and you start to understand that finance or very specific finance terminology is quite a small subset of that, let alone current financial terminology. These sorts of acronyms may not have changed over time, but specific companies that are being spoken about in the context of finance or a context of investments have changed. The products that are being released changed every single month, every single quarter. So you can start to think about the dictionaries or the glossaries or the lexicon that these ASRs, automated speech recognition engines, are trained on may not necessarily be kept up to date all the time. The second thing is the actual quality of the audio that is in these data sets and the accents of the speakers in the data sets. Where are they getting their audio from? A lot of the annotation that happens in the space, and we know this for a fact because we've actually been creating data sets for training of ASRs, they're generally spoken about in the US English accents. So US accents, and even if you think about the US, there's the Midwestern accent, there's the New York accent, there is the Southern accent. There's so many different accents even in the US. And so you have to think about the sorts of accents that are available to actually train the accuracy of the ASR actually impacts the overall accuracy that it can actually be based off. As an example, I, as the AI or the ASR, have only heard the pronunciation of a specific word by a specific accent. Let's call it a US accent. Now, if I hear the exact same word, tomato versus tomato, then if I haven't heard tomato as an Australian, as I would say it, and I've only heard tomato, I may not make the association that is the word tomato. I might think tomato is a new word or it's spelled slightly differently. That's a very reductive example, but if you extrapolate that out, you start to understand that there's a lot more edge cases when you think about the financial terminology or the context of financial audio, because you think about different executives are coming from all different countries around the world. Their disposition for how they pronounce certain words are going to be slightly different compared to the data sets that these ASRs have already been trained on. So all of these things go to show to say that this all impacts the accuracy of the ASR in general. So one of the challenges here in financial terminology or financial transcription is understanding that based on the sample set that a lot of these ASR technologies are being trained on versus the real world scenarios. Let's take an earnings call. A lot of the quality of audio that these ASRs are trained on, generally speaking, are fairly straightforward audios. Now we're seeing a greater progression towards these edge cases of distorted background noises, etc., because we're seeing that being replicated more in the real world. So these ASRs have to catch up and expand their data sets to actually include these things. When you go from a controlled environment where the ASR has been trained, potentially just US accents with a fairly clean audio, to a real world scenario of an earnings call with an accented executive who's speaking on a phone line with background noise and distortion, speaking about product lines that have only come out in the last month, you start to understand why this is challenging for AI transcription to be able to do this at a high accuracy. But when we take a more technical industry like the finance industry, a lot of the variables here for the accuracy of the AI models are suddenly outside of our control. There could be multiple speakers talking over each other. As I said, very specific terminology. They could be pronouncing a company name or a product name with an accent. But it's also one of the reasons why you see in an industry like finance, where the consequences of getting something wrong, of an error in a transcript, is actually quite material. If somebody transcribed something as 18%, but the word was actually 80%, or if they were transcribing something as 100 million US dollars, but it actually was 100 million Australian dollars, as an example. The currency is different there. It's in these situations when there is a very high consequence of getting something wrong that we actually see a huge incentive to increase the accuracy of these transcriptions. And it's in these use cases, which is why we're actually seeing humans stay in the loop, why there is still a human editor that goes in and corrects an earnings call. We're seeing a higher precedent here and a high emphasis on accuracy. And that's achieved both through a very specialized transcription model and provider, or using human in the loop. And it's often actually both, right? It's using a more specialized transcription model as well as using humans in the loop to go ahead and verify and check that every single word, every single terminology, every single ticker, every single acronym is actually reflective and can be cited to something that can be found and validated online, that is current, that is relevant, and that is accurate. So that's one of the biggest challenges we see in terms of financial terminology. So the next question, from our perspective, why do most AI transcription models struggle specifically with finance terminology compared to general business language? I've said that before. You start to see that in finance, let's say, take public equity. So let's take earnings calls. People might be using a shorthand in the way they speak when they're referring to, could be a product name, it could be a person's name. So if they're using company tickers, or they're ascribing a particular trend or statistic or movement, and they're ascribing that to a specific company or a specific product line, being able to make that association with high accuracy is really important. And because there's just not enough of a data set there to be able to update a dictionary or a glossary in real time, the amount of times that these ASRs or AI transcription models are being retrained based on new dictionaries that are being updated just doesn't keep up with the speed at which these dictionaries or glossaries continue to expand. That, in a general sense, for I would say 95% of use cases outside finance, doesn't matter so much, right? Because there are only so many words in the dictionary. Things like ROI, things like earnings per share or EPS, or things like EBITDA, referring to the profitability of a company, these sorts of words have been generally set in stone. There's not too many new words that an AI transcription has to learn from. So in those contexts, general business language is a little bit easier to start to model for, easier to start to improve and train a model on, right? Because there's only so many variables. No longer is the variables what are the different words that an AI transcription needs to learn. Maybe the different variables are the different background noises, or the different number of speakers, or the different pronunciation based on accents. There's more controlled variables there, so it's a little bit easier to solve for that problem, because the constraint of the problem or the actual scope of the problem seems fairly fixed. But as soon as all of those variables are the same, introducing as well these additional product names, or the additional terminology, or the additional company names, or the additional people's names, and the additional spelling of individuals' names in the context of the topic that we're talking about, suddenly there are so many more variables. And with so many more variables, it becomes a lot harder to actually train an AI transcription model if the cadence is every 6 months, every 3 months even, to be able to capture all of these things in high accuracy, right? So a lot of these ASR models are starting to learn punctuation better. They're starting to learn accents a little bit better, and they're understanding audio quality a little bit better. But the things that they're not able to identify, the variables that are generally changing often. And again, one of the challenges here we see, not only in financial transcription, but in general AI transcription that is related to this, is being able to identify speakers independently, right? So both in real time and asynchronously, being able to accurately identify a speaker's voice and attribute the right speaker tag to the time that they're speaking sometimes is actually quite a challenge to do at a very high level of accuracy. And if you think about it, it's because it's so hard to train for every single variable. There's not necessarily going to be a data set of every single person who's ever spoken in the world and have it accurately annotated to the right person's name. And so there is some challenges that actually come into this that is one of the highest priorities for ASRs to be solving right now. And this is very important in the context of the financial industry, because you start to think about, if reading through an earnings call, you incorrectly ascribe the statement of the CEO perhaps to somebody in the IR team or the investor relations team, then suddenly that means something very different. If the CEO says something is going to grow versus the IR team, the weight that the CEO says it is going to hold a lot more. And so being able to accurately identify the speaker and ascribe that statement to the speaker becomes very valuable. And these are the sorts of challenges that financial transcription, given the emphasis on accuracy and the emphasis on what we're trying to do and the consequences of actually getting it wrong, these are the sorts of things that become really important. Next question is, are there particular categories of financial terms that are especially challenging? I've gone through this. It's tickers, product names that are changing regularly. Generally speaking, there may not be as much variance in terms of new tickers all the time, but a new product might be dropping every quarter or potentially even every month, depending on what industry we're talking about. And so if you're taking something that is very specialized and you might say it might be a pharmaceutical drug name, like these sorts of names might be very hard to actually say accurately, transcribe accurately if there's no pre-existing data set that gives any indication of this is how a drug is actually named or a product is named. Or you might take the tech industry that are using words out of context for the names of products. If you go all the way back and you even take iPhone or Apple iOS, they're naming their different OS systems. Snow Leopard, they're naming it Yosemite, they're naming all these different things that have a meaning out of context, but how would an AI transcription necessarily know that these are the names of products? And so it's this idea of a real-time dictionary to contextualize certain words, because the ASR may actually understand what the word is, but may not know that word in the context that it's actually being spoken about. So these sorts of edge cases are really important to solve for, because until these can be solved, they need some level of real-time dictionary or real-time updating database and knowledge base to actually pull from. So the next question is, what was our aha moment when we realized conventional transcription was fundamentally inadequate for financial content? And we've been in this space since 2019. We've been transcribing financial audio for 5-6 years now. And so one of the biggest things that we would see is that a lot of the ASR models, whether they were public ASR models or even what we tried to build internally in the early days ourselves, we were just finding that there still had to be quite a significant amount of humans in the loop, right? So our human editing team that we spend a lot of time training and a lot of time really fine-tuning to make sure that they're as skilled as possible in the industry. And we would actually find that early days when we were using more generic ASRs, or when even we were training our ASR, we had to use a lot of human in the loop. And so that's generally a really good leading indicator for us, is what is the biggest opportunity for us? Because at the end of the day, what we deliver to our clients is a perfect transcription, right? So whether that is through AI, whether there is through human in the loop, at the end of the day, it just has to be a perfect transcript. And so when we're auditing internally our operations and understanding that, okay, we have to still do quite a large amount of human in the loop, that became a very clear opportunity for us. If we can solve for the 80% that is fairly common in the financial industry, then that last 20%, that's when we can actually have our team go through and spend a lot more of their time making sure that every single word, every single company name is actually verified, is perfect, is correctly adhering to the style guide that our clients actually need. Also understanding and running the experiments internally. If we are changing the audio or we're enhancing the audio of our files before our AI transcription engine actually runs on it, that actually has an impact on the accuracy for us as well. If we believe we have built the most efficient pipeline and workflow in the entire industry for financial transcription, what does that look like for us? If we could start to transcribe company names correctly, understand exactly what product names in the context of certain calls or certain industries are, if we can start to understand people's names more accurately, then the uplift in productivity for our human editors would suddenly increase. They could actually spend more of their time doing the less laborious parts of the QA process, and they could spend more of it making sure that the style guides are adhered to, the company names, the terminologies, the people's names, the right numeric values are correctly transcribed. All of these smaller nuances, we actually wanted to give our humans a head start and allow them to spend more of their time triple checking those, right? And so if they have the augmentation of AI to actually increase their starting point, that's just going to make them a lot more productive. And what we saw internally is it actually increased the accuracy, obviously because their starting point is higher, but also because their fatigue is less. And so as human editors are starting to build their own pipeline and their own efficiencies in how they go about editing and QAing an actual file, that has a net positive impact in terms of the speed, the productivity, but also at the end of the day, it's the accuracy, right? The fastest human the fastest perfect transcription is what we really promise to our client. So the expectation is we deliver perfect transcripts, but the speed at which we can actually get there, that was the opportunity. That was the aha moment for us to really look at innovating. How do we go ahead and build a pipeline, both in improving the ASR, improving our own models to create very finance specific transcription that is able to give our human editors a head start so our human editors can come in. And that's essentially how we can turn around perfect transcriptions in the finance industry faster than anybody else in the industry. So the next question is, what's our fundamental difference? What is the technical differentiation we have? The best way I can say it is, as I said before, generally ASR technology, their accuracy is impacted by a number of things. What the data set it's been trained on, i.e. what is the glossaries, what's the industry lexicon that it understands. The second thing is its ability to deal with multiple speakers, deal with different accents, and then deal with audio, the quality of audio. And so for us, when we're really thinking through how do we really improve this, it's looking at those different factors. And then you have the next stage of that, which is the human factors. So the best way I would analogize this is if you think about a racing car. So if you're trying to build let's call it a Ferrari, you have a Ferrari engine, you have a Ferrari car, a Ferrari chassis, and then you actually have a Formula One driver, right? All of these components have to be optimized in order for an F1 race or for a Ferrari to win a race. And so what we really see here is, number one, how do we build a better engine? So what does that mean? It means, okay, how are we dealing with audio? How are we dealing with real-time dictionaries? How are we dealing with changing product names or unique uses of potentially quite general words, right? So that is what we would refer to as the engine. And so we did a lot of work in improving that engine, because a lot of the limitations of other ASRs, they're working on more generalized data sets. If we can really customize this specific to the finance use case based on everything I've already mentioned, suddenly we could see a really strong uplift. Okay, so that's the first thing, is the engine of the car. The next thing is the actual chassis. So if you have a Ferrari engine, but you put it in, let's call it a Toyota car, you won't necessarily go as fast as a Ferrari engine in a Ferrari chassis. And so this is something we really worked on. And so that can be analogized to the actual editor, right? The actual editing platform that our humans use. If you think about a Ferrari car, an actual human has to sit in it as the driver. And so we have to work really closely with our editors, and we've been doing this since 2019. So we've transcribed hundreds of thousands of hours now. And so we have a lot of that feedback from our editing teams to say, okay, this is what makes a file easier for us to edit. This is what makes it more difficult. And how do we introduce a feedback loop for us to be customizing our quote unquote Ferrari chassis or Ferrari car to optimize it for the Ferrari engine we've also built based on what the editor pain points are, but what is the editing workflows that makes it as streamlined as possible. So that becomes really key and really proprietary to what we do and why we can actually turn around the fastest perfect transcription, because our humans are the ones that make it perfect. But our humans are actually using a tool and using a platform that doesn't exist anywhere else in any other company across the industry, because it's been totally built from the ground up by us. And that's given our really unique intersection of insights related to the transcription workflow, ASR, AI transcription, and the finance transcription space. So you can kind of think of that as Ferrari that's really been turbocharged with not even autopilot, more copilot. And so then that is the facet related to the actual transcription platform using our transcription engine that we've also built in. And then the third component here is the drivers, right? The actual human editors. So we work exceptionally hard and we pride ourselves very much on the quality of our actual editors. So we process 10,000 plus applications to join Inflection as a transcription editor, and we accept under 1%. And the kind of tongue-in-cheek quip for us, it's actually easier to get into Harvard as an acceptance rate or Y Combinator as an acceptance rate than it is to actually become a transcription editor at Inflection. And so that's one of the really key things here. We have all three components. We invest a lot in training and developing the skill sets of our editors specific to the actual platform that we've built, right? And so that's essentially training F1 drivers to drive a Ferrari better. A Ferrari car that is being customized all the time, every single week, every single month, being customized and improved for the driving experience of our F1 drivers. And then on top of all of that, the base engine that improves how quickly and the performance of the actual car, i.e. our AI transcription engine, making that better and better all the time is going to improve the entire process. So that's our key differentiation. That's how we're able to outcompete everybody in the industry on speed, on accuracy, and on price, given the combination of those three. I think that the last thing here is, what are the most common objections or misconceptions we encounter from potential clients around AI's ability to accurately transcribe financial content, right? So what is misunderstood in the industry? And I think the analogy I just outlined there in terms of a Ferrari engine, a Ferrari chassis, and F1 drivers. So many of ASR providers are innovating on their word error rate, quote unquote. I say that in inverted commas because one of the misnomers here is word error rate can be quite a misleading metric for the accuracy of AI transcription, specific to the finance industry, right? How many errors are there, or how many words are incorrect when you take an AI transcription versus what would be known as a ground truth, which is created and verified with humans. And then you see how many discrepancies are there between the AI transcription of a specific model and then the human transcription, which is the quote unquote perfect version. But the variations or the caveats here that you really have to consider is, number one, what is the quality of that audio? What is the difficulty of that specific test file? Because generally speaking, you would see it as a single audio, a clear accent, and oftentimes you wouldn't necessarily see it specific to a finance use case. So when you see a word error rate of 5% or under 10% or anything that is being marketed in the industry, you have to take those caveats in mind. It doesn't actually represent the real world scenario that is often seen in the financial industry. Why? Because the financial industry won't always have a single audio, single speaker audio, won't always have a clean audio. There might be background noise, distortion, may not always necessarily have a clear US accent. And then on top of that, financial audio is generally around financial topics. And so when you take the word error rate of a generalized ASR, this doesn't take any of those things into consideration. And that actually becomes quite problematic in terms of understanding the accuracy. But anyway, let's take that aside, right? Most people make the assumption that if they get a really good engine, then that's it. Depending on the use case, there are a number of different engines out there that, let's say it's outside the context of finance, or maybe it's even in the context of finance. Getting it to 95% plus 90 upwards of that might be enough, right? In the context of why people might be using it, maybe they don't need the 99.9% perfect transcript, or they're okay with some deviations or some errors in terms of company names or people's names, or they don't need speakers identified accurately. Like, there are definitely use cases where you don't need 99.9% accurate transcripts. And so in those use cases, the biggest misnomer is understanding that, okay, if I just have a really amazing Ferrari engine, that's enough. And so that's fine if your use case doesn't demand 99.9% perfect. But if people do demand that, then the misconception here is just having an engine's enough. Because as I said, if you have that engine, but you do not have a chassis, you do not have an editing platform for anybody to go in and check, then suddenly that is taking Ferrari engine, and if there's no chassis, then it's no good. But let's say you have built something, or you're getting something off the shelf and you put an AI engine in to a subpar chassis. Now, suddenly the expectation is you can put any driver in and just go as fast as the engine has promised it can do. Also doesn't work. Let's assume, right? Now we're talking through variables. Let's assume you can get a really good transcription engine, a Ferrari engine. You can put it in, maybe it's not a Ferrari, but maybe it is, let's call it a BMW or something that is not quite at the standard of a Ferrari car, but it can at least hold the engine and it can at least operate with a number of the key functionality. Now, if you just put in any driver, I guarantee you, if I get in an F1 car versus an F1 driver, they are going to beat me. I guarantee that, even if I'm in a faster car than them, because I haven't been trained how to use that specific car with all of its functionality, and I haven't been trained, and I just don't have the skill set to be able to drive as quickly as they do. And so understanding that you actually need the trinity of all three if you're in an environment where accuracy really matters. Okay, so that's one of the biggest misconceptions here. If you have one of the three, say you have an amazing human editor, but you don't have a good AI transcription engine, and you don't have a good AI or just transcription editing platform, then the best transcription editor will still be beaten by people who have all the other components. The second thing to really understand, and one of the biggest misconceptions in the industry, is inevitably there is going to be a level to a varying degree of a trade-off between speed and accuracy. So if you want something as quickly as possible, let's take it to the nth degree and we talk about real-time transcription. Generally speaking, the accuracy of real-time transcription won't match the exact accuracy of a human perfect transcription. Human perfect transcription let's say on average happens within 24 hours. Even if we just take a single transcriptionist, what we see is generally 1 audio hour to 4 hours. That's the industry standard. That's not taking into consideration QA review or multiple stages of human editing. But let's say it can be done within a day on average as a human editor, right? That's 99.9% accurate, assuming the human editor is good enough, versus close to real time, almost immediately through AI real-time transcription or even AI asynchronous transcription. So you start to see there's a trade-off. If you're willing to wait for up to a day, you might get a perfect transcription, or if you want it immediately, you won't necessarily get a perfect transcription, but at least you have something immediately. This is what we work really hard on, is how do we solve that, right? So we're of the belief that over time, the arrow of progress is pointing towards that we can go closer and closer to real time without trading off as much accuracy. That's not to say it's not trading off any accuracy, because if that was the case, then we've already solved the entire problem of transcription in every single industry, and which just hasn't happened yet. But we believe that it's possible to get closer to real-time accuracy with comparable accuracy to humans. So if you're looking at the 3 vectors, you're looking at speed, you're looking at accuracy, you're looking at cost. So there's yet to solve all 3 that is perfect nirvana, right? Real time, that's perfect transcription, that is as cheap as it comes. And so generally speaking, it's a trade-off. So if you're looking for high accuracy in a shorter period of time, you might be paying a premium, right? So it might not be as cost efficient. But if you're looking for really cost efficient, really fast, you may be trading off on accuracy, because you might get close to real time. You might be paying a lot cheaper rate than if you were augmenting it with a human workflow, but the accuracy is a trade-off. And so there's all these different variables. These are really important caveats to understand in the context of transcription, not even specific to finance transcription, but overall in the industry, it's these things to consider. The last question we have here is related to what is the future? What's the future of human transcription? What's the future of human augmented transcription with AI? So the first would be, in general, is verifying the output. Humans, in the context of financial transcription, is about verifying output. You might have an AI transcription that might be able to do 95% accurate, and it's going to keep getting better and better, right? I'm confident to bet on that arrow of progress. As it gets to 98% accurate, you don't know what that 2% differential is between perfect and not. And so it might take a preposition that is different and say, hey, that's a different word. And it might say, this is a company name that's different. These are the same. As you hear that analogy, you can understand how inappropriate that would be in the context of finance. It doesn't really make sense. And so what we're going to see over time is what I believe is that the humans are going to play a really important role in fact checking and verifying what the AI has done. That's already existing today. But the main difference here is how much they're involved, how many files they can do in a 1-day time slot. Audio files per hour they can actually get through is going to change, as AI is going to be able to solve more and more of the more difficult areas that humans currently need to actually do. So that would be speaker identification, that would be company verification, that would be understanding specific numeric verification. All of these things, generally speaking, are being very heavily vetted right now by humans. But as we see the evolution of AI get even better, what we're going to start to see is that instead of humans having to do that first layer, literally going through and saying, this is speaker A, speaker B, it's actually going to be verifying. So they're going to have a different starting point. And so as that evolves, you're going to see a lot stronger move towards this trinity that we were talking about before, this continuum of a trade-off between speed, accuracy, and price. As AI is able to do more, then you're going to be able to move further down this side of the spectrum, right? You're going to be able to get a faster transcript at a higher accuracy that over time will be cheaper. So that is the general progression we're going to see. But on the flip side of that, you're also going to maintain to see, okay, a human verified transcript, assuming that there is still a need for a 99.9% perfect transcript, which, as we've mentioned in the context of finance or any highly compliant industry, take legal, take medical, that is going to be very necessary. You're going to see that the efficiency and the productivity of human edited transcripts going to trend towards zero. It's not going to get to zero, obviously, because with the human involved, that's not going to be a negligible cost if you're an actual client building out a workflow. But it's understanding that this en masse is what's going to happen, right? We're going to move closer and closer to real-time, highly accurate, and cheaper transcription. That is going to exist. But the human element is going to be this premium that's going to occur for highly compliant use cases, and that will also continue to exist. However, the efficiency and productivity of that service, of that use case, is going to change the economics over time. However, until the kicker here is that even if an AI transcription is doing 95% now, that's 5% a human is in the loop. If it does 98%, the 2% that the human is in the loop still often requires the same amount of attention, the same amount of value that is ascribed to that transcript. Why? Because what you're paying for isn't necessarily the amount of time that a human spends working on a transcript. What you're paying for is the fact that a human has indeed gone over the transcript, right? That you're paying for the level of confidence, you're paying for that reliability, you're paying for that stamp of approval that the speakers have been identified correctly, that the companies, the product names, the terminology has been researched, that tickers are correct, that acronyms are correct, that all of these things that make or break the validity and the value of a transcript has actually been approved by a human. Right? And so building that confidence, the premium placed upon human oversight and human approval, that's ultimately what's going to be paid. The price and the cost of that may trend downwards, but it's important to understand that if it's the humans doing the last 5% or the last 2%, the value that they are able to ascribe to the product is still going to be true. Because up until we're able to get to 100% done by the AI, humans are still valuable in that loop. There's going to be a place for humans in the loop. The actual mechanics and the workflows of how those humans operate are going to evolve. I still believe there's going to be value ascribed to the actual humans that are doing it. You're going to see a higher preference for the more qualified humans in the loop because they're able to do more, but the value, the credibility, the stamp of approval, right? The trust that you're actually paying for with the humans is also going to increase when there's going to be a proliferation of more AI content. Then you're going to pay a premium for the human stamped approved versions of it. That's generally what we're seeing. If you're interested and you want to hear a little bit more, or you want to learn more about how transcription can be used in your workflow, head to inflectiontranscribe.com. That's inflectiontranscribe.com. And I'll see you on the next video.